I'm glad you're all here. We have now 40 minutes to show you how to automate your monitoring. The first portion will be done by me. I'm going to give you an introduction to automation, all the basics within Checkmk. I'm going to show you a quick example with Ansible. And then the second portion is going to be done by my colleague Philip, and he's going to show you everything automation with Salt, and then also a quick demo. Let's get started right away. For most of you, this is probably nothing new, but I keep seeing that again and again, especially if it's customers that have been around for a while. They really don't understand some of the rules that make Checkmk so great, especially if we talk about automation and things like that. Things like that have to be used, otherwise you're going to create so much more work for yourself, and that's exactly the opposite of what you're trying to achieve by automating everything, right? So the Checkmk configuration, if you want to automate that, first of all, you're going to have to look at all of the different structures and so on, and of course also having automated hosts that you have to set up manually so everybody knows where to move around and where they can't. And based on that, we also need some rule-based or really setting rules and really differentiating that from manual rules as well. For example, by just having them in the main folder. And then also when it comes to host tags, obviously, you have to make sure that you always know what kind of host tags you created yourself and which ones were automated. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, then you're probably wondering, how can I automate Checkmk? What kind of API do I have? And for that purpose, the main API is the web API, and that is just something that we've seen within Checkmk a couple of times yesterday. We've seen that quite a bit as well, and that's the main configuration API for Checkmk. And using this API, we can do almost everything, really. We can then really create everything. We can create hosts and services, recognize services, and activate services. And apart from that, we can also do many other things. For example, define rules or define host tags. In addition to that, we also have a couple other APIs that are very well known, and that's the live status and hardware-software monitoring and things like that. And using these APIs, later on when it comes to automation and you know a little bit more, you can use this information that's already available in order to progress your automation and just make it more dynamic. And of course, you can also just respond to current situations if you need to. And if we now take a closer look, you can automatically see what you can really do with Checkmk, how you can use it to automate things. Like I said, you can use sites, hosts, services, and so on. And of course, apart from that, you also have direct access to hosts by using agents and plugins. And of course, also you can set host tags and also labels, of course, as I've learned yesterday. And in addition to that, if you have done basics like that before and they're established, in addition to that, you can almost do almost anything in Checkmk and automate it. So I already talked about rules, but we can also do users, groups, contact groups, and also host and services groups. And you can also do the deployment of all sites and master sites. So all of that has to happen somehow, and regardless of whether or not this is something that you use with Salt, Ansible, or whatever, the basics are always the same. All these tools work very similarly, and you can sort of break it down like this. So all these tools need to know who they're working with, so they get a list of hosts using several different paths so they know what to do. And in this case, or you, the administrator, defines what kind of conditions are present in these hosts. So what are they supposed to do with who and when? And they use rules to do that. It's a little bit different in some cases, so this is just an overview really, but the automation tool at the end of the day is really in charge of really creating something using these components. So it's supposed to try to figure out whether or not you have a host and you really have the desired condition. If that's the case, you don't have to do anything, or are you not where you want to be, and then you have to do something, and in this case, you would then sort of implement it or initially really, just set it up. So you can do a deployment of the software, or you do the configuration, and at the end of the day, you then have the condition that you're looking for that you've defined ahead of time. Okay, so that sounds like this is something for the administrator. You just define it once, you just set it up once, and then you can just lean back and watch everything happening by itself. And it's not as simple as that, at least not always. The trivial case in which automation really reduces your workload is very obvious. If the software is already present and the knowledge within that company is already present as well, then the likelihood is pretty high that you're going to profit from it. Of course, in addition to that, you also need to have some naming conventions that need to be established and things like that. And then also compliance of state must be ensured and things like that. So if you can't do that manually anyways, then you're going to have to do it with automation anyways. But then it's really not about really reducing the workload, but instead it's really something that you can't handle manually anyways. It's not as trivial anymore if automation tools don't help anymore. That's something that not a lot of people like to talk about, because of course, if you don't have the software, and of course you don't have that knowledge within the company, in that case you just need lots of work invested initially in order to really do everything, and that is something that you have to do, right? And you definitely have to be aware of that. Automation is not something that just happens very quickly. That's something you have to work on. You have to define rules. You have to make sure how you get all the hosts in that you want to use. You have to structure everything properly, because, I mean, a database server has a different job than a web server, so you have to treat it differently. It's not as trivial as it sounds. It's for a lot of work, and that is something that you have to do, because at the end of the day, you want to reduce your workload, right? So I also mentioned a couple more examples here. For example, the automation software may be replacing some features just because of its architecture, right? Something that you may already have in Checkmk, because Checkmk is really part of all different components, and if you then want to import them to Ansible, then you may actually not use Checkmk anymore, and then maybe users can't do anything or everything. And that's also true specifically for the agent updater, for example, where first of all you think, okay, this is a competition, a competitive feature, and at the end of the day, it is, but it's just something that's very difficult to show in Ansible. It's difficult to show in Ansible that the agent updater monitors itself. That is something that's included straight away. If the agents are in the Checkmk host, then we don't only have signed agents that are rolled out, so it's not only going to get the ones that it trusts, and where the team said, okay, this is the agent that you can roll out because I want it that way, but instead, in Checkmk, you can also just know how this update is running without any further configuration. And rebuilding that in Ansible is definitely possible, but again, that's a lot of work, and that is something that you don't necessarily have to do because it's already there. You don't have to develop it again. Okay, now let's assume that we decided to go with Ansible, or at least we're considering using Ansible. especially for all the specifics that Ansible is offering. First of all, Ansible is Python-based, and the configuration is happening in YAML. We've already heard about YAML yesterday, and that's why we can say Checkmk and Python and Salt, they have that in common, and that's really all they have in common, to be honest, because Ansible does lots of things very differently than other tools. First of all, it is not one without agents, so that means the connection is always happening actively from the Ansible server to the host system, whether it's SSH or other APIs. And then at the same time, Ansible doesn't have a database. So we have different options when it comes to teaching Ansible which host it's connected to. There's also a memory that can be used for that, but overall, Ansible is very, very slim. It doesn't have a database, and that's why it's very, very compact. Ansible also has a definition or a defined group of hosts. So it's very, very simple, and it could be the in format, YAML format. It's pretty open. And using these hosts that have to be defined there, you carry out playbooks. That's just definitions in YAML as well that tell you, or that you can use to say, okay, use this host to do this or that. For example, carry out a task or whatever, you know, a specific task, or if you have bigger playbooks, you can just say, okay, please do this or that, and they can then contain tasks. A task like that is the same as just a specific command, please do this and that, please make sure that file XYZ is going to be on host B, for example, or not be on host B. So before I show you some examples, I have a couple notes for you. GitHub, this is our account. There's a project, it's called Ansible Checkmk, and this is the example that we're going to see in just a second, and also examples or all the things that are going to be shown towards the end. So you can just have a closer look if you want to, and there's also some documentation there, and also some more roles and features. Some are already available. There's going to be more in the future. At least that's what we're planning on doing. And of course, we are always looking for your feedback. I know that some of you are already using Ansible quite a bit. So if you feel like it, and if you want to participate, or you just want to give us some ideas or whatever, please feel free to let us know. Okay, let's go back one slide and let's look at one of those host inis. A host ini is usually made up of definitions that we see down here, and this is the Windows development host, and we also see this parent group right here. So this is a group that's containing other groups. And then I also have this group down here. It's pretty static. So this is the big benefit. Regardless of what you're doing with your actual groups, where you're defining all your hosts, this group up here is a group that you can always access, and then you just implement whatever you're doing under it. So it's very, very transparent. At the bottom, you don't see it right here because the slide wasn't big enough, but you can really see the GitHub account. In the GitHub account, you're going to see the variables that go with the host, so the access data that you have to define, and you just have to make sure that you define the SSH, and then also with this host file, you can then actually use the playbook. The playbook I already mentioned. So the initial playbook or the example playbook is pretty simple. So I have the parent host, parent group up here, and I then don't have to adapt it. I only do that in the host ini, and then I also have framework information. So there's so-called facts about my host data, and that's for the rules. I could also do that based on an SS, but task-based probably better. Hi to Simon at this point in time for this. Thank you for this very interesting conversation. So It's very easy. If we now look at one of those roles, a role is made up of different things that you can see here. So I have the plugin rollout is reduced to whatever I necessarily need. We have defaults and variables, and they just define what I don't know necessarily. So with defaults, we have the only manual interaction point, and currently we can or have to define the Checkmk, but if we're lucky, this is going to change at one point in time. In the middle, you're going to be able to see meta. So we already have the prep work for Ansible Galaxy, so we also know the minimum requirement for Ansible, so it works. And then last but not least, that's the heart of a role. You define the tasks. In this case, we're dynamically accessing the tasks based on the operating system, in this case RMP. Later on, adding new ones is not that difficult anymore because, because we just have to create a new YAML for Solaris or whatever. A task is made up of 2 to 3 different subtasks. So there's actual tasks. In this case, we are downloading a simple agent in a predefined area, and then we are also installing the agent as long as it's not there anymore. Well, not the right version at least. If it's already present, then we don't do anything. And then you can just skip that. And this is an idea for later. You could also configure firewalls, Cell, Linux, Zulu, and so on. So lots of different things. There are almost no limitations. You just have to define it again and implement it. Okay, so I already told you quite a bit, and I already gave you a small example. You're going to find another example online on GitHub, but maybe just a few more indications or notes or a couple things that you should keep in mind. First of all, you always have to avoid traffic if possible. We see on the left-hand side that there is a little PowerShell command in order to find out what version the agent that's on the Windows system is using. Windows 1.5 is about 5 megabytes. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you scale that to 1,000 hosts and you do that once a week or once a day even, then it's definitely going to add up. So just try to avoid traffic as much as possible. At least that's what I'm doing, even if it's just small traffic. Next, you also have to make sure that you use variables as much as possible, and also manual interaction should be restricted as much as possible, because it's still an automation tool at the end of the day, and it's supposed to create automation and not be a manual tool, right? And then last but not least, I think that's a little bit of a controversial topic, or at least it could be a controversial topic, because this is not in line with the idea of Ansible, but you have to make sure that you're using your sites in order to get plugins, data, agents, and so on. I'm always a big fan of getting your data from the primary source and not a secondary source, you know? Okay, now I'm going to have to rush, and that's why the last slide is just going to be a quick slide. So this is GitHub right now. That's what you're going to be finding there. We have an agent installation based on the OS type. We can then install the plugins based on processes, based on files, or based on packages. And last but not least, we also activate the host, so host registration. And just so you know, and then I'm done, and then Philip's going to take over. The last 2 points right here, they're already live on GitHub. They're not activated yet, they're not there yet, but they're going to be there soon. All right, that's everything I wanted to mention for now, and now I'm going to hand over to Philip.
Laserpointer. Ja. Super. Ja, Thank you, Marcel, for this great introduction into automation. I will introduce that to you in the context of SALT, using Aqua Healthcare as an example. My name is Philipp Lemke, and I'm team lead for DevOps Center at Aqua Healthcare. We only started the department in April, and we are sitting between the departments and are building bridges for operations and development in order to make this topic bigger in our company. I'm also ITIL owner. I do event and capacity management as ISO 20K from the point of ISO 20K. So I've been in operating for 6 years, 13 years in monitoring, and 7 years with Checkmk OMD. And if there is still time, I'm also a freelancer and IT consultant. And of course, I work with SALT. Short overview over Aqua Healthcare. We are an international IT healthcare IT provider. Showing you the German-speaking DACH area here. So when patients get to a hospital or surgery plannings or impacts, this is a X-ray system. But we are looking at this Aqua managed service. This is also about automation. So we've been with Checkmk from the beginning. We were the 4th customer of Checkmk. So long before Wato existed. So what is AMS? It's a service for hospitals mostly, and we offer monitoring, operating maintenance, database management, pet management, virus protection, network, and firewall services. And this is all alongside ISO 20K certification. And this is one of the examples, like how would a customer request come in? Maybe in a larger hospital, they may have their own DBAs, Unix admins, and maybe an administrator is leaving a department, and it may be necessary that this resource or that the employee needs to be replaced by somebody, or maybe the clinic wants to outsource this because maybe it's hard to find someone, and that's where we come in. We take over the systems that were staged by the customers, like Unix systems, AX, Solaris, whatever there is, and we take them over into our managed service area. This means that we're working in a very heterogeneous environment because we didn't stage them, and they don't always come from one hand. So what's our infrastructure? Currently we have 80 sites connected in the German-speaking area, 4,700 servers, and 155,000 services. So that's just some background. So our decision for Checkmk and SALT, these are the 2 tools we wanted to work with. Checkmk we decided for a long time ago because it turned out to be the best monitoring tool. Even in the past, the performance was a big factor, and now it's our standard and has been since 2015. SALT, from my point of view, is the best automation solution in the Aqua context because it's both written in Python. Ansible is too, but SALT also gives us a full Python environment for all our platforms, not just for Linux or Windows, also for AX and Solaris, and also Static Link. This is an enterprise feature for the Linux systems, but still there's always one environment with which we can work, and we don't have to build any workarounds. So that was why we went with SALT. So briefly, how does SALT work? It's not quite like Ansible. I mean, if you don't use SALT SSH, it is actually similar, but we use these minions, and these minions connect with the SALT master server, which is central management system, and that builds configurations for the minions in tasks and in tasks. So they always connected to the master, to the outbound connection, the outbound connection stream. First through the publisher port, it's all encrypted through TLS. And they're going through port 4505. They're getting their tasks, they perform them, and then there's a returner port, the 4506, and the results go back to the master. That's how it works from the basic setup. And there are two terms, the grains installed. It would be the facts in Ansible, so that's just information that turns up as soon as a minion is installed. This information exists. You know what product it is, OS finger. It's just a fraction of the information. The data is available right away. It's not encrypted because they're not critical yet. But through the, they are visible on the minion, and they're lying on the minion as well. That's important. Then there's pillar data. Within these pillars, you find all the variables. It could be credentials as well, because they are encrypted, and they're never available at runtime on the minion. It could be a credential, as I said, or other variables, like the Checkmk version, maybe, that you want to roll out. So how to get started when we take over a customer? It says, well, these 20 database Unix servers should be taken over. Then our first task is to get the systems under control. And we do that. First we install the Checkmk agent first, and then our software inventory, and then just everything from there. But it's actually quite reasonable to go with configuration management from the top, installing a salt minion first, and then we can install a Checkmk agent over that, and then connect the system to our central infrastructure. So salt is an enabler for us. It allows us to do things for us. And I will show you live in a minute. What we can do is that we can add all the hosts into the Wato that are in the salt. We can set the host tags, and Marcel already said that we can have compliance checks. For example, is the security configuration up to par with what we need in our compliance guidelines? Then we can have a state. There's a state logic in a bit more detail. So there is a state that we want. It's a declarative representation, and especially in the salt context, it's designed in a way so that it works beyond limitations of OS. So, for example, I want to install the following Checkmk agents on all my minions. So a simple definition that says it's a pkg install Checkmk agent to be rolled out to the minions, and that's it. Of course, in the back end you need an abstraction, and that also happens. You can see it here in this example. This is a state apply, and I'm giving it the order ensure Checkmk agent installed on the following systems. This is my starting situation here in the gray box. So I can show you what salt does. So I have a Checkmk agent in the fitting agent on the first minion. On the second minion there is no Checkmk, and on the third agent I have a Checkmk in an old version. So as soon as I apply the state, the first minion doesn't need any action, because it is already in the correct version. Salt sees that, does a simple connect, sees version is fine, and does nothing. Here, in second case, it installs the agent, because it sees it's missing. It's using a yum, for example. It could also go directly through an RPM. Or under Windows, it's using the MSI to get the agent to the desired version. This works quite reliably, but I think this is analogous to Ansible. Here there is not a big difference. I'm going to show you a little live demo. So the same what Marcel told you, but in a salt context based on installed software on a system. So there's software installed on the servers that I want to monitor. The plugins are being wrote all based on running processes. Also based maybe on config files, which are on the system. Could be any file object, really. This is just a feature that's still a prototype. I don't really want to... I mean, I still want to work on that, but I can also show you how an auto-tagging works. So because these minions, after the plugins were all rolled out, they're being registered in Vato, and then the grains we've seen are automatically set as host tags. So this is a little preview of what will be live in 1.6, what you get from the hardware software data and the labels. But here in the 1.5 I can already show you that this works. And this state logic is important. I'm gonna delete hosts and you will see that Salt will always try to fix a delta. Salt sees which host was deleted and will register the minions again automatically in Checkmk. The same is true for host tags, but I'm gonna show you live. I really hope this works. Oh yeah, there is a final slide, sorry. There is a GitHub repository. I didn't upload all the content yet because there's German documentation with it only. I want to add English documentation as well. I hope I can get it done today. Or get some of it done today. Yesterday when we tested it, it did work. This looks good.
So. Schlecht, wenn die Maus jetzt doch noch gehen würde.
Now I just need to get my mouse working.
Eine Maus wäre nicht schlecht, sonst bräuchte ich jetzt.
Is there a mouse available somewhere? Otherwise I'd need a second.
Eine USB.
It's a USB mouse.
Ah, das wäre super. Die scheint jetzt gerade Vorführeffekt, tritt ein.
So this is the effect when you get on stage.
Perfekt, die geht.
Nice, this one works.
So, dann schauen wir uns mal an. Also jetzt die dynamische
So, the dynamic installation of Checkmk agents.
Die Umgebung noch mal zurückgesetzt.
I've reset the environment so it all works out. I currently have 3 minions in my test environment registered. This is my salt master. This is a Checkmk server running. It's still empty, no hosts entered. Here's a Windows 10 virtual machine running parallel. So we have a few operating systems running. I'll show you the rule set first. For the automatic plugin roller. So under package, here this is YAML by the way. It's a pillar file with which you can set up the pillars. So here in installed package, I have the plugin, the Checkmk plugin, and using these patterns, I can install the plugin. For example, you find a package that's called Apache 2 or HTTPD, then Apache status is installed automatically. If it finds a package that's called update assistant, then it knows that it's Windows. As it knows that it's Windows, you don't have to add a comment /Windows anywhere. Then there's an example for a process. If the MSSQL server is running, then it would roll out the MSSQL server rollout. So if there's a logical volume manager config, for example, then it will roll out the LVM plugin. I think that's quite interesting when you have software in running process that is not, I mean, something internal software, for example, that is not properly registered in the OS. Then you can use the running process and find things like software that's not registered as a package that can be rolled over by a plugin. So I'm going to do a local rollout here. That was quick. So based on the rule, he did the dynamic plugin rollout by installed package and did roll out the Apache. Because there was no Apache plugin on the Checkmk agent, it did make one. The same is true for LVM through the rule byfs object. I'm executing the state again. So it succeeded 3, but it didn't make any action because the plugin is already in the correct state. So that's the state logic. That was a local Ubuntu. Let's do this for a Windows. This is taking a little bit longer, but still, as you've seen in the rulebook, it rolled out the update according to by installed package. What it did not do by running process, because there was no definition match, because there is no MySQL software running on the system. So with Salt, I thought it's quite simple. I can do a CMD run. So this is like being in the Windows console, and I can start the SQL service directly out of Salt. So you can see the same output as I were on a Windows system. The SQL server is running. I'm executing it again, just to show you. And now it can, or you can see that it did roll out the MSSQL plugin automatically because it was finding the running process.
Jetzt kann man das Ganze natürlich, wie man nutzt man Sort vom Targeting. Ich habe jetzt immer eine einzelne Maschine gewählt.
I mean, I was targeted a single machine. That's not the standard use case of Salt. Usually you target groups, or I use a wildcard at a risk, so I can target all my minions at once. Now it's running through all of them. If I execute it again on one system, it rolled out an LVM and an Apache because that's the Checkmk server. Both of them were available. It made changes there. 1 successful, 2 changed, and up here nothing was changed. So that's a plugin rollout. All the plugins are installed. Maybe now I can get you screen. You can see under Windows, under plugins, these plugins now exist and they have just been rolled out. And now for the interesting part. I will register something in Wato. So here we go to the Check API. So generically, Max Brenner had a GitHub project where there's a Python wrap-up around the Check API, and I used this and implemented it as a Salt execution. So I can do Check Web API calls in Salt. So I'm calling the Check. I'm calling the minion that's on the Checkmk master, and I'm telling it I'm going to do a call on the web API. I can also include the method, as we can see in the Checkmk API reference. I'm connecting to the local host because, I mean, I could go through HTTP, but as I'm already going through the minion, I am locally on the machine, and there I can go through localhost. I mean, this turned out to be a lot more performant. I have to give it a site, an automation user, as you've seen with Lars, the automation secret, and I'm going to do an AP call and you will see how long it takes. It's almost instantaneously. Here are all the host tags, for example, that exist. So I'm doing it for all the users that are registered. It's a naked Checkmk, so I only have the Checkmk admin and the automation user, but just to see whether the AP integration is there. I can also insert something here if I want to keep working. It can always give me everything in JSON, so I can use it to continue working with it. So we have created integration. And now it's about registering the hosts in Vato. I'm collecting data from all the minions, the grains I mentioned. I'm collecting them and give them to my CMK master as data. If I were to do it any other way, I could also let every host register against the Checkmk server separately and individually, because I have a module for that, but performance-wise, and considering the load, that's not the best way to go, because every server that is being monitored through Checkmk has another HTTP connection, and on 100 or 200 systems in parallel, it's pretty much a DDoS attack, so I don't need that. So I'm going locally through the minion of CMK master. So there are no host tags in there yet. Oh, it's already working. Sorry, I already pushed the button. So changes are actually coming in. Hosts are being entered. Host tags are being assigned automatically. This is through. What has Salt done? As their host tags now are not labels, I have to make sure that these host tags exist. So out of the train Salt context, I got manufacturer, kernel, OS finger, and virtual. City and the auth stacks I just added for demo purposes, but these come from Salt. And they are being registered. And you see that these host text groups have been implemented with their values, and they can all be given out like this in Checkmk. I have my hosts. There is the IP address, the alias, it got all that information and registered it accordingly. When you have a good DNS, of course, that could do it for you, then you don't need to enter an IP address. But this is interesting, you can see it all. I have tagged topics, these are the Salt grains, and they are set. So what I can do is build rules based on kernel Linux, device physical, or manufacturer Dell. So that works. But I want to take a look at it from an even bigger context. Because in the data center I got some data, it's one of our data centers, as I've done for the 3 hosts. I've done it for an entire data center, or a part of it at least, and we're going to look at it. I'm losing the data, it's anonymized a little bit. So I did reset the environment with Salt, so let's look at it. Checkmk is clean again, host tags are only the defaults, so it is reset. So instead of the real data from the test environment, I'm using data that I got from my data center. Now it doesn't do an inventory. I didn't show you that, but it just did an inventory of the hosts. It's difficult right now because they are not accessible without the WAN connection. So it's adding the hosts without inventory. Let's see how long that takes. It's 56 hosts, 3 seconds.
mit allem Drum und Dran.
including everything.
Auch, das ist vielleicht auch noch so interessant, also
Maybe what's
Check
interesting
API
for the
für
Check
einen Host
API, for
anzulegen,
one
braucht er
host,
immer hier im Durchschnitt,
it
sieht man,
takes
die
usually about
20 bis
20
23
to 23 milliseconds,
so einen Host anzulegen mit den entsprechenden Tags,
including the
die sind
tags.
ganz oben angelegt.
They're being
Sieht man hier.
created at the top.
Auch hier wieder erst die Tags anlegen.
So
dann können
first the
die Texte
tags are
gesetzt werden.
started, and then of course the tag
Sieht
can be
jetzt
assigned.
folgendermaßen in Vato aus.
In Vato, this looks like
Hier habe ich jetzt eine ganze
this.
Reihe von Hosts.
Here I have
Die sind alle angelegt,
host of
sind also
hosts.
schnell in 3 Sekunden und habe jetzt hier
It
auch wirklich
was
Daten,
quick,
hab
and now they're
Windows,
here.
Device Physical,
So I've got
hab
the data,
OS
Windows,
Finger,
device
den
physical,
Hersteller
OS Finger,
entsprechend für alle Hosts.
manufacturer for all the hosts.
Kann ich mir ja mal angucken, vielleicht hier ist irgendwo noch ein
I think
AX-System.
there's an AX system somewhere.
Hier sieht man es.
There it
Also
is.
da habe ich schon die Möglichkeit, jetzt einfach per Default
So by
schon
default,
auf einige,
I
sag
can
ich mal, Host-Tags zuzugreifen, ohne dass ich da
access
jetzt
some of the
manuell
host tags
eingreifen
without
muss.
any manual labor involved.
Ja, so viel dazu, das ist halt einfach
So
das
this
Vorgehen
is
bei uns. Erst das Sort
how we
Minion,
do
dann
it.
können wir
First we
die
have the
Daten
salt
schon mal
minion, then we can
rausziehen.
draw data from there,
Dann sind wir da halt sehr schnell auf
and then
einem,
we're quickly
ja, System, was wir managen können.
in a system that we can manage.
Okay. Ja, das war eigentlich so viel zu meiner Live-Demo.
That was my live demo.
Genau. Ach, genau, das Delta-Management kann ich noch ganz kurz zeigen. Also ich kann jetzt auch
I can show
einfach
the
mal hier
delta management
2
for a
Hosts
second.
rauslöschen.
I can delete 2 hosts or 3.
Lösche jetzt auch mal noch einen Host-Tag.
Deleting my
Deswegen
host
habe ich auch
tag.
diese Dummy-Host-Tags
That's
gemacht,
why I
weil
have
sonst
these
sind die
dummy
jetzt
host tags in here,
zugeordnet. Ich lösche
because
jetzt hier
otherwise they
einfach
would be
mal
assigned somewhere. So I'm deleting
den
them.
Trier Host-Tag raus. Also 3
The
Hosts
Trier
und einen
Host Tag.
Host-Tag
So
habe
I
ich
deleted 3
rausgelöscht
hosts and 1 host
und
tag.
führe jetzt den State
1 host and
nochmal
3 host
aus
tags,
an der
sorry, and
Stelle.
then I'll execute the state once again.
Jetzt sollte er, wenn alles klappt,
And
das
now,
Delta
if
erkennen und nur die
everything
3
works,
Hosts
it
anlegen.
should
3 Hosts plus
recognize
den
the
fehlenden
delta.
Host-Tag an der Stelle.
3 hosts plus the missing host tag should be
Das
added.
war Host Nummer 1, Host
So
Nummer
host
2.
number 1, host number 2.
Oh, jetzt bin ich über einen drüber gesprungen. Und der
I
Host-Tag,
jumped
da
over
hat er
one and
genau
the host
erkannt,
tag.
nur den,
It
er hat
did
nur die Gruppe
notice
geupdatet,
that
wo ich das
this
eine
group
Element
needed to be
rausgelöscht habe.
updated
Wenn
where
ich
I
das
deleted
nochmal
something.
ausführe,
If I
sollte er
execute
gar
it
nichts machen, weil
again,
einfach
it
ja
shouldn't
alles
be
in
doing
Vollzustand
anything
ist.
because
Macht keine
everything
Changes mehr.
is
Also so viel ein
in the
bisschen zu
state it should be.
Data Center
So
Automation
that's
Live.
Data Center Automation Live.
Nicht ganz in der Praxis, weil also nicht direkt komplett
It's
live
not
im Data Center,
completely
aber das
live
ist
at the data center
Kundeninformationen ein bisschen
because there is
schwierig, deswegen
customer information
hier
in
dieser
there.
Weg über so ein etwas entfremdetes
So I use this
File, was aber
slightly
live aus dem
anonymized
Data
file,
Center kommt.
which comes
Okay,
live from a data
so
center.
viel
So
von meiner Seite.
thank
Ich hoffe,
you.
es hat gefallen.
That was everything I had. I hope you liked it.
Hat wer Fragen?
Any question?
Ja, hallo, jetzt erste Frage.
Yes,
aber auch
hello.
mal zwei
First
Fragen.
question. Sorry, I have 2.
Zum einen, du hast gesagt, da gibt's
First
diesen
of all, you
Python
said there
Wrapper
is this
um
Python
die
wrapper
Web-API.
around the
Ja,
web
Hab ich ganz
API.
verstanden, von
I
wo das
didn't
kam,
quite
wer das
get
gesagt hat?
where
Haben wir
this
auch
came
auf den
from.
Folien nochmal
Oh, it
drauf,
was on the
den
slide
Link. Das ist
somewhere.
ein GitHub-Projekt.
It's
Ich
a
kann's aber
GitHub
gerade mal hier
project. I can
Kein
open it
Problem.
and show you.
Da ist es schon. Ah, ja, jetzt bin ich hier mit der Maus. Das ist das Ganze, also
This is
Checkmk
it.
Web API.
Checkmk Web
Ich hatte da auch mal
API.
einen kleinen Pull-Request oder
I
der
had
ist
a
aber auch
little
drin,
pull
weil die
request
Host-Tags
that's
nicht
in
so
there because the
funktioniert
host
haben,
tags
wie es
didn't
sollte.
work as
Aber das
needed, but
ja, funktioniert eigentlich recht gut. Also
it
von
works
diesem,
quite well.
Max,
Max,
ja mal den guten Mann.
what's his
Ja,
name?
okay.
Also das ist aber auch auf der Folie drauf.
But it's
kann man
also
gerne
on the
noch
slide.
anschauen, ne? Also
You can have a look.
Nee, weil wir haben sowas auch gemacht.
Because
aber
we have
vielleicht
created
hat's ja
something like
jemand,
this, but
unwahrscheinlich zwar, aber vielleicht hat's
it's
jemand geschickt, der
unlikely,
das
but maybe somebody did a nicer version than we did.
Deswegen
Alles
würde ich
klar.
mir das nochmal anschauen.
That's why I would like to take a look.
Frage 2 geht jetzt eher
Second
an
question
die
is
Entwickler von
about the
Checkmk.
development
Und
team
zwar
of
kann ich
Checkmk,
ja Host- und Servicegruppen
because
bereits
I
über die
can
Web-API
have host
eingeben.
and
Was mir
service
bis
groups
heute
and
noch
create them
fehlt,
through the
oder
web
ich hab's
API.
noch nicht
What I'm still
verstanden, ist
missing,
die
or maybe
Möglichkeit,
what I still
Rules für
understand,
Host- und Servicegruppen
are rules
anzulegen.
for host and service
Kommt
groups.
das? Ist das irgendwie
Is this
in Planung?
something you're
Hab ich's nicht verstanden?
doing? Didn't I Did I get it wrong? I'm not sure if I got the question right. You want to use the web API to make rules and define them in Checkmk? Yes, for example, I want to say I have a host group, and for this host group, I want only hosts in there that have the tag Windows Server. Can I make a rule for that? And I think that doesn't work through the API. From memory, I'm not sure. I mean, rule sets can be made, and many people down here showing me a thumbs up because they're doing this, but rule sets can be defined, and I'd be surprised if conditions couldn't be set like that. Now Lars is having the mic in his hand. I remember that host and service groups cannot be defined. Well, with the rule sets, it's not so simple to set them through API. There are two calls for this. For one, you can read the entire rule set, go into the data structure, make modifications, and then you put the rule set back in. It can be a delta with a little problem if somebody else changes something, but this was how we could do it state of now. But when it comes to 1.7, there will be larger changes leading to a more comfortable solution. Then I'd say we can go into the break. By the way, yesterday's slides are all online. You find them on the conference page, and also today's slides will be available tonight.
Alles klar.